My name is Samantha, and if someone had told me that a couple of weeks before my 30th birthday I'd be sitting in my kitchen, staring at a cold laptop screen and wondering what it even meant to start living for real, I would have laughed. But here I am, 29 years old, and ahead of me is that big, symbolic number, 30, the age when, as everyone says, you should finally figure out who you are, what you want, and why your windowsill plants are still dying even though you buy them. The most expensive soil in the store. I work as a software developer. It sounds cool, but in reality, it means I stare at a screen for 10 hours a day, debugging errors, arguing with colleagues over trivial details like button colors, and trying not to die of boredom during yet another meeting. In 6 years at the same company, I learned to write code perfectly, patiently listen to meaningless reports, and feign interest when my boss talked about the growth dynamics of client solutions. The job is stable, the pay is decent, so much so that 2 years ago I bought my own apartment. Well, not bought, I took out a mortgage, which now breathes down my neck, reminding me of itself every month like an annoying mosquito buzzing in my ear at night, but still, it's my place, my coffee in the morning, my view of the gray sky and city lights. As a child, I was a good girl, not because anyone forced me, it just happened that way. Excellent grades, neat notebooks, no adventures, no stories to remember with a smile. I always did what was necessary, but my younger sister, Emma, is the complete opposite. She's 24 and still lives with her parents, laughing loudly, doing whatever she wants, and somehow managing to get everyone to approve. You know how it is with younger children, they're like the bright lights of the house, even when they're wreaking havoc, and everything is forgiven, always. Our parents, Linda and Robert, are a typical suburban couple. No drama, no luxury. Mom works as a receptionist at a dental clinic, dad in sales, which in itself requires a saintly patience. They live in the same house where we grew up, about 40 minutes from me. It's a house with pale yellow walls, a manicured lawn, and endless family photos in the hallway. Emma never moved out after college, and frankly, I think Mom's rather glad about that. She likes it when someone makes noise in the kitchen and leaves coffee stains on the table. 2 weeks before my birthday, I was sitting in my apartment one evening, with a glass of wine instead of dinner, thinking about how to celebrate this new adult milestone. I didn't want a loud party. I didn't want people I didn't even talk to outside the office. I wanted something simple and real. Dinner with family, conversations without phones, genuine laughter. One place came to mind, Giovanni's restaurant, where we used to go when I was a child, a small Italian wonder on the corner of an old street, with worn wooden tables, the scent of basil and garlic, and that very same chicken parmesan I first tried when I turned 10. We celebrated everything important there, graduations, birthdays, even that winter when Dad finally paid off the loan on the family minivan. It seemed right to celebrate my 30th birthday there, too, to return to something familiar and warm, like wrapping myself in an old childhood blanket. I picked up my phone and called my mother. The rings kept coming, and I was about to hang up when I heard her voice. "Hi, dear, what's wrong?" she said absently, and I could hear the TV in the background. "Mom," I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "I was thinking about my birthday. Maybe the whole family could go to Giovanni's? Just us, you, Dad, Emma, and me. I'll make reservations for 6, Saturday, the 14th. "Of course, dear, sounds tempting, we'll be there." That's it, that's a wonderful idea, without her usual enthusiasm, just sounds tempting. She must have been busy, tired after work, or more interested in the TV than my voice. I tried not to pay attention to it. After the call, I texted Emma, "Hey, celebratory dinner at Giovanni's on the 14th at 6 o'clock, are you coming?" She replied almost immediately. "Yes, of course, I'll be there." No smileys, no exclamations, dryly, as if I'd suggested she go to the DMV instead of my birthday, but she'd agreed, and that was already a good thing. I put the phone down on the table and looked at my reflection in the window, a tired face, slightly disheveled hair, the warm light of the lamp behind me. It seemed like I was doing everything right, calm, thoughtful, without fuss, just a family dinner, just me and the people I love. I spent the next 2 weeks shopping in a strange euphoria, trying to convince myself that this anniversary wasn't just another day getting older, but a turning point, a promise to myself that life would truly begin. I wandered through the racks, trying on dozens of dresses, and in every mirror, it seemed as if my reflection was arguing with me. A woman who still seemed young but was tired of looking like she was trying to prove something to someone. And then one day, just when I was about to give up, in a small boutique downtown, I saw it, that very dress, dark blue, with a soft fabric that shimmered slightly under the lamplight, simple, but with that rare grace that isn't flashy, but simply makes you feel beautiful. It cost more than I'd ever allowed myself to spend on clothes, but at that moment, I thought, if not now, then when? You turn 30 once in a lifetime. I got a haircut, went to a salon for the first time in a year, and even got a manicure, bright red, a little bold, as if to remind myself that I could still be bold. I wanted to feel alive, not just existing between coat and coffee, but like a woman who had a celebration, however modest. Work kept me busy these weeks. A project was approaching a deadline, and I spent my evenings in the office, surrounded by the glow of computer screens and the smell of cold coffee. Occasionally, one of my colleagues would look up and ask what I was planning for my big day, and I, slightly embarrassed, would tell them about a family dinner at Giovanni's. They would smile and say it was sweet, that not everyone needs to throw parties. Sometimes just being with family is the most important thing. And I would nod in agreement, even though deep down I knew how much I wanted everything to go perfectly, without awkward pauses or forgotten gifts. On my birthday, I woke up surprisingly calm. It was Saturday, the March sun filtered through the curtains, and the air was warm, with the scent of spring, so fragile and new. I put on coffee, turned on some music, and started tidying up, dusting the table, cleaning the linens, neatly stacking the towels. It seemed as if this order around me was helping me tidy up inside. Around 3, I took a shower and stood under the hot water for a long time until I felt the anxiety evaporate along with the steam. Then I put on my makeup, carefully, cautiously, as if my face were a fragile mask. I put on a new dress, looked at myself in the mirror, and suddenly realized I looked better than I expected. Not youthful, no, but confident, calm, genuine. I arrived at Giovanni's a little early, about 10 minutes early. I was greeted at the door by the owner, an older woman with a soft Italian accent who had known us since I was a teenager. "Samantha. How nice to see you again," she said, and her words warmed me. She led me to a table by the window, set for 4, with a snow-white tablecloth and a candle in the center. The air was thick with the aroma of garlic, fresh bread, and something else, familiar, like a memory. I ordered a glass of wine and waited. Time dragged on. At 6 o'clock, the table was still empty. I glanced at my phone. No messages, no missed calls. They're probably late, I thought, sipping my wine and trying to smile to myself. Saturdays are usually packed, especially if you're driving from the suburbs. By 6:15, my mild unease was turning into alarm. I called my mom. The ringing continued, then voicemail came on. I tried my dad, same thing, then Emma, silence. I texted in the family chat, "Hey, I'm at the restaurant, where are you guys?" and set my phone on the table, staring at the screen, as if that would speed up the message. A waiter approached, a young man named Tony. I remembered him from childhood. He leaned a little closer. "Would you like to order anything while you wait for your guests?" His voice was polite, but his eyes were too soft, with that look people give to those who feel embarrassed for others. "No, thank you, they should be here by now," I said, trying to smile, though a strange chill was already growing inside. At 6:30, I stopped pretending everything was fine. My family was never more than 5 minutes late, never. I called my mother again, silence, then again. I texted, "Mom, I'm worried, please answer. Are you okay?" The minutes dragged on like honey. Other people were dining around me, couples, families, laughing groups, and I felt their gazes occasionally slide to me. To the woman sitting alone at a table for 4, I imagined what they were thinking. Maybe she'd been abandoned, maybe someone had died, but I just waited. Tony approached again, more cautiously. "Miss Samantha, are you okay? Should I bring you some more wine?" I shook my head, feeling my cheeks burn with shame. "No, thank you, it's just they'll probably be here any minute now." And at that moment, as I spoke those words, I realized I couldn't believe myself. Time dragged on. At 7:30, when the candle on the table had almost burned out, my phone finally vibrated. I grabbed it, my heart pounding. A message from Mom. I opened it, ready for an explanation, an apology, any reason, just to understand. "So sorry, honey, we're at the mall, helping Emma pick out a dress for her birthday next month. We lost track of time. Happy birthday." I read it 3 times, then again, and again. I must have misunderstood something. They couldn't just forget. They were shopping for Emma's birthday, which was in 4 weeks. As I read that message again, and then again, something inside me seemed to snap, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a soap bubble popping. I sat in Giovanni's, amid the cheerful hubbub of strangers' voices, with a half-empty glass of wine, in front of untouched silverware and neatly folded napkins. And all I wanted to do at that moment was write them everything that had accumulated over the years. I wanted to tell them how much they hurt me, how unfair it was, how tired I was of being the one who could be put off for later because Emma always had something more important. I wanted to scream, write long, angry messages, accuse, demand, ask why. But I couldn't. My fingers hovered over the screen, as if something inside me said, "Don't do this, they won't understand anyway." So I simply set the phone down on the table, took a deep breath, and beckoned to Tony. "Can I please pack everything I ordered to go?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. He looked at me with that polite sympathy I dreaded most. "Of course, Miss Samantha, is everything all right?" "Family matters?" he asked cautiously. I nodded. "Yes, they can't make it." It was easier than explaining the truth, which sounded too pathetic to be spoken. As he went to get the boxes, I looked at the neatly set table, 4 place settings, 4 glasses, 4 empty chairs, and thought how stupidly I'd planned it all. I'd ordered 4 dishes in advance. I wanted everything ready when they arrived, so the evening would go smoothly, without waiting. Now I had enough food to eat Italian pasta for a week. Tony returned, carefully folding the bags. I paid and left him a generous tip. "Happy birthday, Miss Samantha," the hostess said as I passed the counter. I smiled, but couldn't utter a word. The drive home passed like a thick fog. I turned off the radio because I couldn't stand a single song. Cars drove by, streetlights flickered, and everything around me seemed somehow alien. When I finally got to my apartment, I didn't even take off my coat. I just put the bags in the fridge, sat down on the couch, and for the first time in a long time, allowed myself to just fall apart. The tears came instantly, unstoppably, not the light kind that quietly flowed down your cheek, but the kind that burst from within, the sobs that shake your entire body, leaving you wrung out, empty, as if the air had been sucked out of you, because it wasn't just tonight. All of this, the years, dozens of small wounds I'd turned a blind eye to, my high school soccer championship, when I scored the winning goal for the first time, and there were no fans in the stands because Emma had a dance recital, my graduation, when they arrived almost an hour late because I had to pick up Emma's friend's dress, even the party to celebrate my promotion last year. My colleagues prepared a surprise, a cake, flowers, and then my mother called and said they couldn't come because Emma had a cold, a 23-year-old woman with, you see, a runny nose. And all this time, I was justifying them. I told myself that my parents loved us both equally, that circumstances just worked out that I was the oldest, independent, and doing fine, while Emma was still little, needing more attention. I believed it because otherwise I'd have to admit that I was just second best, and now they'd missed my 30th birthday, not because something terrible had happened, but because they were helping Emma choose a dress. For her 25th, everything became crystal clear. My phone vibrated with notifications, friends, colleagues, some with cards, some with congratulations, some just with gifts and jokes. I didn't answer a single one. I couldn't pretend to be happy when everything inside me was breaking down. I just sat on the couch, listening to the silence, and thinking how strangely easy it is for a sense of family to crumble if you try too hard to convince yourself that everything is fine. 3 days passed before I felt like I could lift my head and go out. Again, everyone at work seemed cheerful as usual, and only Jessica, my friend, the one who always senses when I'm down, came up to me with a cup of coffee. "So, how was your dinner?" she asked with a smile. I froze, and the first thing that came to mind was a lie. "Oh, they had something come up, they had to reschedule," I said lightly, as if I were discussing the weather. She nodded, but her gaze was too intent, as if she knew I was holding something back. On Wednesday, she cornered me between tables and said, "Murphy's on Friday, no arguments, we'll get you out of this funk." Murphy's was our favorite bar near the office, with sticky tables, dim lighting, and classical music always playing in the background. "Not fancy, but cozy, homey." "Okay," I replied, "sounds tempting." And so, on Friday night, about 10 of us crowded into one large booth. We ordered cheap beer, swapped stories of customer disasters, told jokes, argued about movies, and for the first time in a week, I felt the ice inside me slowly melt. At one point, someone brought a cupcake from the supermarket with a single candle, lit it, and, in a falsetto voice, began singing "Happy Birthday." Everyone joined in, clapping, and I laughed. For the first time, truly, and as I blew out that candle, I thought, maybe sometimes it's not the person who shares your last name who truly becomes your family, but the one who just sits next to you when you least want to be alone. Everything was perfect, so perfect that I couldn't believe how easy and natural happiness could be when no one expected anything of you, when no one was checking their watches or comparing you to anyone else, no pressure, no disappointment, just me and people with whom I could laugh until my stomach hurt, drink cheap beer from thick mugs, and know that no one would call me that evening to remind me that I should be more serious. Jessica, flushed from laughter and the alcohol, leaned toward me and, looking me straight in the eye, said, "This is much better than some stuffy family dinner, right?" I laughed, not just out of politeness, but from somewhere deep down, from where the fatigue and anger had been penned up for the past few weeks. "You have no idea," I replied, and Jessica certainly couldn't imagine what it was like to sit alone at a holiday table set for four and pretend everything was fine. 2 weeks passed, I had fallen back into my usual rhythm: work, coffee, short walks in the evenings, and the silence I was gradually getting used to. I was sitting at home at my laptop when my phone vibrated, and a familiar name appeared on the screen. "Mom." In a family chat, I stared at the screen, feeling something twitch inside, like a small nerve that hadn't been touched in a while but still ached. For a few seconds, I just stared at the notification, hesitating to open it, but curiosity, as always, got the better of me. I clicked. "Join us for Emma's 25th birthday celebration, April 11th, at the Grand View Ballroom. Donation, $2,000 per person. Please send via Venmo by April 1st. Can't wait to celebrate our baby girl." I reread the message several times, as if the words might change if I looked closely. $2,000, donation, per person. I felt the blood rush to my face, and my hands shook so much I almost dropped the phone. Are they kidding? After everything that happened? After they didn't even come to my place? And she's writing this to me as if I'm one of the guests invited for the sake of propriety, not her daughter, not even a personal message, just a copy of the text, like a newsletter, as if I'm a stranger. The anger rose slowly, thick as hot tar, and I began pacing the room, muttering under my breath, unable to stop. $2,000, are you serious, Mom? After you couldn't come to my birthday because you were picking out Emma's dress? And now, a ballroom, a donation, Venmo? Do you even hear what that sounds like? I spoke louder and louder until I stopped, because I realized there was no one to talk to. They never heard. I opened Venmo, found her profile, and for a moment I considered simply ignoring it, deleting it, forgetting it, pretending I'd never seen the message, but a quiet, cold determination awoke within me. I entered the amount, $10. In the comment section, I wrote, "The best and only gift for you." I hit send, and suddenly it felt easy, empty, but light, as if I'd cut the last thin cord connecting me to something that had long since ceased to be love. Then I opened my contacts and blocked everyone: Mom, Dad, Emma, all the numbers, all the chats, Facebook, Instagram, even the old family WhatsApp where we'd spent years sending recipes and dog photos. If they wanted to treat me like I didn't exist, then that's how it would be. The next morning, I called a locksmith. A man in overalls arrived an hour later, smelling of oil and coffee, and asked why the locks needed changing. I shrugged. Just needed to. I didn't explain that 2 years ago, when I bought this house, I'd given my parents a spare set of keys, in case of an emergency. Now I clearly understood that no situation was worth holding the door open for someone who would break your heart. When the locksmith left, I closed the new door, listened to the lock click, and for the first time in a long time, felt safe, not physically, but internally. A couple of days later, I was overcome by a cold, as if my body had decided to finish me off after all those storms. I sat on the couch in my pajamas, wrapped in a blanket, working from home, sipping tea, and trying to ignore my fatigue. The beauty of programming is that you can hide behind a screen, pretending to be in control, even when there's complete chaos inside. I was just writing a piece of code when someone knocked loudly on the door, insistently, rudely, so loudly that I flinched and spilled tea on my laptop. I crept to the window and cautiously peered through the blinds. My heart sank. There they were, all three of them, Mom, Dad, and Emma. Mom was rummaging through her huge bag, and I immediately realized she was looking for the old keys. I chuckled softly, "Good luck, Linda." A second later, I heard the scraping of metal on metal. She was trying to pick the lock. Then Dad's irritated voice, "Try again." Another sound, then a pause. And suddenly Mom screamed, "Samantha, open the door right now. We know you're home, your car's in the parking lot." I stood motionless, my heart pounding in my chest, but not from fear, from anger. Emma, of course, couldn't help but shout, "You're acting like a child. $10. Do you even realize how much you've embarrassed us in front of everyone?" Mom added on top, "Samantha Marie Henderson. If you don't open that door right now, there will be consequences." Consequences, I almost laughed. What was she going to do? Take away my phone? Forbid me from going out? I'm 30 years old, I have my own house, a job, and a new life that they no longer include. I simply put on my noise-canceling headphones and returned to the code, trying not to hear the scratching, talking, and arguing outside for another 10 minutes. Then everything went quiet. I looked out the window and saw them heading back to their car, Mom waving her arms, Dad replying, Emma checking her phone. I stood and watched their car pull out of the parking lot, leaving a shiny tire track on the asphalt, and for the first time in a long time, I felt not sadness or anger, but a strange calm, as if someone had finally closed a door behind me that I hadn't had the heart to close myself. Emma's birthday flew past me, like a train rushing past an empty platform where you stand alone, not even trying to wave. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself that I didn't care, that I'd let go, that it was all somewhere far away now, that same familiar feeling was still throbbing inside, a mixture of curiosity, pain, and an old, not quite erased anticipation. So that evening, as the city outside slowly darkened and I sat with my laptop on my lap and a mug of tea in my hands, I unblocked Emma on Instagram, just for a couple of minutes, just to look, just to make sure I hadn't missed anything. And I saw it, the enormous Grand View ballroom, the ceilings draped with garlands of gold and pink balloons, glittering lamps, a podium topped with a pink cake the size of a bicycle tire, and Emma in a long sequin dress, like a child actress trying too hard to please the crowd. Everything looked luxurious, almost like the brochures, only empty. There were maybe 15 people in the photographs, my parents, Emma, and a few guests whose faces I barely remembered. The vast hall looked incongruous, like a stage where they forgot to turn off the lights after the audience had already left. I noticed Emma's smile was strained, as if someone was holding her cheekbones from the inside. Mom stood nearby, tense, with that expression when she pretends everything is under control, even though everything is already crumbling. Dad looked like he'd been forced into a suit. I took screenshots, I don't know why, maybe just to remember that they, too, can fake it, and then I blocked them all. Again, there was a strange feeling inside, not satisfaction or even revenge, but some deep, viscous regret that everything had devolved into a theater of photos and other people's congratulations. Late that evening, my phone rang. On the screen, Jake, my cousin, the son of Aunt Patricia, my dad's sister, We've always been closer than the rest of my family, even though we haven't seen each other in a couple of years. Samantha, he said, without even saying hello, what the hell happened to Emma's party? What do you mean? I asked, even though I knew perfectly well where he was going with this. Your mom asked everyone for $2,000. My mom told her it was crazy, and yours told her not to come if she couldn't afford it, so mom told her to go to hell. I couldn't help but laugh, a real laugh, bitter but liberating. Well done, Aunt Patricia. Then mom called everyone else, Jake continued, and it turns out your parents told most of the other relatives the same thing, pay up or don't come, so no one came, well, except Uncle Terry and Aunt Susan, but, you know, 2,000 for them is like a cup of coffee for us. I was silent, listening to the collapse of the myth of the perfect family, which I'd been trying so hard to dispel. But here's the weird thing, Jake said, your mom's now telling everyone you're having a nervous breakdown, that you made something up, and that's why you stopped talking to them. Then I told him everything, about my 30th birthday, about the empty table at Giovanni's, about the message from the mall, about those meaningless excuses I'd once believed in so much. He was silent for a long time, then he said quietly, "It's terrible, Samantha, just terrible." 2 days later, Aunt Marie, my mother's younger sister, called. Her voice was soft, a little tired, like that of someone who too often finds herself mediating between other people's quarrels. "Samantha, dear, we need to talk," she began. "If you're calling to say I owe you an apology, you don't have to continue." No, she said quickly, "I'm calling because your mother's been telling everyone you have mental health issues, that you didn't come to Emma's birthday party because you're jealous it was being held in such a fancy place." I snorted. Seriously? Did she tell you why I stopped talking to them? She said it was all a misunderstanding, that you were being dramatic. I closed my eyes. Misunderstandings? Aunt Marie, they didn't come to my 30th, they didn't even call, they went to get Emma's dress. I told her everything, slowly, pausing to keep from breaking down. When I finished, there was silence on the line. "Oh, my God," she finally said, quietly and almost with fear, "I had no idea, she didn't even mention your birthday. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry, let me talk to her." A week passed, I was buried in work, trying not to think about it all, when the secretary called from reception. "Samantha, you have company." I stepped out into the hall, and time seemed to stand still. They stood there, the three of them, right under the cold light of the lamps. Mom looked collected and determined, with that expression on her face when she's ready to take the stage to give a speech. Dad, on the other hand, was confused and clearly didn't want to be there. Emma stood behind me, buried in her phone. "This is ridiculous," Mom declared loudly. Before I could even approach, her voice rang out throughout the hall, causing the people at the counter to turn around. "You're ignoring your family, Samantha, you blocked us everywhere, this is not normal." "Mom, be quiet," I hissed, feeling my face heat up. Dad raised his hands like a tired policeman. "She needs help," he declared, addressing not me, but those around him, the world. "She needs psychological help. This irrational behavior has to stop." I looked at them, feeling neither anger nor fear, only a terrible, cold clarity, the kind that comes when you realize you're no longer a child and no one will ever come to protect you. The security guards began to notice something was wrong. Two elderly people and their adult daughter were arguing in raised voices in the lobby of a glass office, which usually smelled of coffee and disinfectant. Not family drama. People at the reception desk turned around. Colleagues passing by tried to pretend they urgently needed to check their email. I felt myself blushing, and only one desire throbbed in my head: to get out of here. Away from these accusing faces, these voices, from my mother, whose gaze pierced me, as if I were 15 again, caught in something inappropriate. "There's a cafe across the street," I said quietly, clenching my teeth, trying not to look at any of the passers-by. "If you two really need to discuss this, let's at least do it there." We crossed the street. I pushed open the glass door and sat them in a corner, away from the others. I ordered black coffee for myself, the bitterest on the menu. to keep my hands from shaking. As soon as we were settled, Mom, without waiting for the first spoonful of sugar or sip of water, pounced. "You're crazy, this hysteria needs to stop." Hysteria? I almost laughed, though my insides were pounding. "You missed my 30th birthday because you went shopping with Emma." "It was a simple mistake," she said icily, as if apologizing were a sign of weakness. "We forgot." Forgot? I looked her straight in the eye. "I called you 2 weeks before, wrote, reminded you. How could you forget?" Mom crossed her arms over her chest, as if they were a shield. "Well, Emma's birthday is more important. 25 is a quarter of a century, Samantha, and 30 it's just a number." Dad interjected with that tired sigh that always made you cringe. "You're too sensitive," he said, "always have been. Remember crying at graduation because we were late?" "You were an hour late," I hissed. "I had to sit alone while everyone else was celebrating, taking photos, and their families applauding." "We had things to do," Mom dismissed, as if I was recalling trivial matters. "Emma had a doctor's appointment. A checkup that could have been rescheduled for any other day." I leaned forward, feeling my voice break. "You always do everything for her, always." Mom snorted. "You're obsessed with this idea of favoritism. It's all in your head, you need therapy." I pulled out my phone, opened my notes, and began reading aloud everything they'd ever missed. My first soccer game, where I sat on the bench, watching the other girls wave to their parents in the stands. The science fair, where my biology project won first place, but none of them came. The Dean's List ceremony, the first university exhibition, for which I spent all night preparing. As I listed them, my voice trembled more and more. "Now," I said, "remember where you were when Emma had her dance recital, or the cheerleading competition, or the school play, where she had 2 lines. You're always there, always." Mom leaned back in her chair, looking at me with cold disdain. "You're keeping score, it's unhealthy." "I've had enough," I said, standing up, my knees shaking. "If you show up uninvited one more time, I'll get a restraining order." Mom opened her mouth, raising her eyebrows indignantly. "You wouldn't dare." "Try testing me," I replied calmly. "I don't want to see or hear from you until you admit you did wrong, and not just wrong, but systematically pretended I was some second-class citizen in your family." I turned and walked away, leaving them sitting at the table with 2 cups of cooling coffee. When I returned to the office, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. 3 months passed, 3 long, quiet, wonderfully peaceful months. No one barged into my home, called, or sent me accusations. I started breathing again. I focused on my work, saw friends, even allowed myself to start a relationship with a guy from the gym. Nothing serious, just a lightness I hadn't felt in years. It turned out life can be quite warm and smooth when you don't expect your family to plunge a knife between your shoulder blades again. Aunt Marie became my quiet guide to family matters. She'd come by every couple of weeks, bringing a warm apple pie wrapped in a linen bag and telling me the news, trying to do so with a gentle smile, but her eyes betrayed the pain of being caught between 2 sides. "Your mother's latest excuse," she said one day, slicing a pie, "is that you're going through coming of age, like, you're just learning to live independently, and you'll figure it out soon." I laughed, pouring myself some coffee. Remarkable logic. Apparently, coming of age is when you begin to realize you don't want to be constantly humiliated. Marie lowered her eyes, quietly stirring the sugar. "She started baking again, you know? She says it's her therapy. She asked me to give you this pie." I nodded and took a bite. It was truly delicious, crisp, cinnamon-flavored, just like the kind Mom used to treat us to on Sundays. "She's trying, Samantha," Marie said quietly. "Really?" I asked, feeling a tired irritation welling up somewhere deep inside. "Or does she just not like that I'm no longer playing my usual role, the girl always waiting to be noticed?" Marie said nothing. The kitchen smelled of apples, warm baked goods, and silence, that rare, dense silence in which even memory speaks louder than words. One morning, as I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of cold coffee, trying to sort through an endless string of work emails, the doorbell rang. it was such an insistent, confident ring, as if the person on the other side of the door had every right to do so. I wasn't expecting anyone, so, feeling my heart suddenly quicken, I cautiously peered through the peephole. 2 police officers stood on the landing, a man and a woman. In uniform, their faces serious, as if they'd come on some important matter. "Has something happened to someone?" I asked, opening the door, trying to keep my voice calm, even though my palms were instantly sweating. "Can I help you with something?" "Are you Samantha Henderson?" the tall officer asked, taking a notepad from his pocket. "Yes," I replied. "We received a request from your parents to check on you," he said in that calm, official tone that always had a hint of doubt. "They say you haven't been in touch for several weeks and may need help." I froze. And then I almost burst out laughing. That's how far things had gone. Social welfare check, because their adult daughter doesn't want to talk to them. "Seriously, officer?" I tried to hold back a laugh, but it still broke through, nervous and dry. "I'm perfectly fine, as you can see. I'm alive and well, working from home. I just blocked my parents after a family dispute. They know perfectly well why." "Sometimes these kinds of conflicts reach us," the female officer interjected politely, and from her expression, I could tell she'd seen it all. "We'll let them know you're safe, but if they continue to provide false information, they could face a fine." "Wonderful," I said, closing the door. As the police footsteps faded down the hallway, anger washed over me with renewed vigor. This was a new level of control, a new low. As if scenes weren't enough for them, now they'd decided to bring the law in, as if I were a runaway child. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in the office, immersed in code, when Jessica approached me. Her face said it all before she even opened her mouth. "Your parents are here again," she whispered, "in the lobby." "What?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "The guards asked if they needed to be thrown out, but they made quite a scene." I exhaled and went downstairs, this time, without fear, only with fatigue. Sure enough, there they were, Mom arguing with the guard, waving her arms, and Dad standing nearby, head bowed, feigning embarrassment. "There she is," Mom announced to the entire hall, "my daughter, who thinks she's too good for her family." "Madam, you need to leave," the guard said, but Mom waved him off. "I'm not leaving until she talks to us like a normal person." "A normal person?" I repeated, feeling my composed calm crumble at the seams. "Normal people don't stalk their kids at work. Normal people show up to birthday parties they promised to attend." "You're being unreasonable," Dad said loudly, as if addressing an audience. "Everyone can see you need psychological help." David, my boss, emerged from the elevator. "Excellent, simply perfect." "Samantha," he said quietly, as if afraid to wake a beast, "why don't you take the rest of the day? Figure this out." I grabbed my bag and headed for the exit, feeling my colleague's eyes burning into my back. "If you want to talk, follow me," I called over my shoulder. They followed. We found ourselves back in the same cafe where the last time had ended with the threat of a restraining order. The waitress, recognizing us, nervously adjusted her apron, apparently hoping there would be no drama today. "Say whatever you want," I said, without even opening the menu. Mom straightened up, folded her hands on the table, and her voice sounded almost solemn. "You're destroying this family, Samantha." "No," I replied, keeping my voice low, "I'm protecting myself from this family." "What are you protecting yourself from?" "We love you," she interrupted. "Really?" I narrowed my eyes. "You have a strange way of showing love. Let me ask you something. What did I major in at college?" Mom blinked, lost in thought. "What?" "Well, something with computers." "Computer science and math," I clarified. "And Emma?" "Communications and theater arts," she answered without hesitation. "You see," I said calmly, "you know every little thing about her, but nothing about me," Dad intervened, trying to lighten the mood. "It doesn't mean anything, Samantha, don't exaggerate." "Okay," I leaned forward, "what's my favorite color?" They exchanged glances. Mom smiled awkwardly. Emma's is pink, I continued, and mine? That's just nonsense, Mom said, but her voice was already shaking. It's not nonsense to me, it's proof that you never saw me. I was comfortable, independent, obedient. Emma was a little girl who needed everything. I didn't demand attention, and you decided I didn't deserve it at all. That's not true, Mom countered, but her eyes sparkled. We loved you both equally. Then why did I always feel like I had to earn love? Well, she got it just for breathing. Someone laughed loudly outside the window, and this alien laughter struck my ears painfully, like a reminder that the world beyond the walls of this cafe lives, laughs, and moves on, while we still trudge through the swamp of old grievances. Mom turned away, looking out the window. Dad squeezed her hand, and I simply sat and thought about how many years I'd waited for something from them that they could perhaps never give: attention, recognition, a simple, human "we see you." But suddenly tears welled up in her eyes, and they weren't for show, not the usual, deliberately demonstrative sobs she once used to cover up irritation or guilt. These were real, living tears, heavy, almost childish, as if some inner defense built up over the years had crumbled in that moment. I looked at her and felt no malice, only weariness and a quiet amazement that all this was finally happening now, at this table where my most acute wounds had once begun. When Emma didn't get the lead in the school play, I said, feeling something hot and caustic rise in my chest again, you called the director and spent an hour explaining how unfair it was, how talented Emma was, and how she needed support. And when I didn't make the varsity soccer team my sophomore year, you simply said, "Oh, well, try again next time." Those were different situations, Dad interjected quickly, repeating what I'd heard my whole life, completely different. How were they different? I leaned forward, looking straight into Dad's eyes. Explain to me how. He opened his mouth, but found no words. Mom looked away, and in that silence, I suddenly realized that perhaps they would never be able to explain it because they didn't realize what they were doing. For them, it was all just the background of life, a familiar distribution of roles, where I was strong, independent, she can handle it herself, and Emma was fragile, requiring care. Here's what will happen, I said quietly, almost a whisper. I will continue to live without you. Maybe one day, if you can acknowledge not only what you did on my 30th birthday, but everything that has happened over and over again, we can try again. But for now, leave me alone. Mom reached across the table, but I pulled away. Samantha, please, she whispered, her voice trembling, and I could see her pride warring with despair. No, I replied, feeling my back finally straighten inside. I won't beg for a drop of attention anymore. I won't stand in the shadows anymore. That's it. I stood up, left them there, in the same corner cafe where, it seemed, the old me remained, and walked home into the cold autumn rain. 6 months had passed since then. Aunt Marie still visits me from time to time, bringing her signature apple pie and news that I don't ask for, but listen to anyway. Last week, she told me my parents had started seeing a family therapist, someone who, as Marie put it, specializes in favoritism and family dynamics. It's funny, but it seemed almost symbolic to me, as if they finally saw that the problem wasn't me, not my sensitivity, but the cracks they didn't want to see. Mari said that Mom confessed during one of the sessions, they really hadn't paid attention to me, had taken me for granted, because I never complained, and after that confession, she cried for an hour. When Mari told me this, I simply said, okay, and I meant it, not because I wanted Mom to suffer, but because, perhaps for the first time in her life, she was beginning to understand. Emma, I learned, moved out a month ago. She found a job and her first apartment. Mom is taking it hard, according to Mari. Now her little bird has flown the nest, and the house, which had always been too small for 2 adults and 2 daughters, suddenly felt too empty. Mom wanted to write me a letter, but Mari stopped her. Don't rush, she'll come when she's ready. Sometimes I miss them, especially on holidays, when the city lights up, or when something good happens at work, and I instinctively want to dial Mom. But then I remember sitting alone at Giovanni's on my 30th birthday, watching families at the neighboring tables raise their glasses and laugh, and the urge passes. My therapist says I'm fine. Yes, I started seeing her too, I thought that if I'd been hearing I need therapy my whole life, maybe it was worth checking out. And it turned out that yes, I did have a lot to figure out. She said I'd learned too early that being perfect meant being invisible, that I'd learned not to cause problems because that was the only way to keep love alive, and that being alone felt safer than disappointment. It was painful to hear, but now I feel better. I have my friends, my job, and my small apartment that no one else has a key to. I'm dating that guy from the gym, his name is Marcus. He has a normal family, where people actually show up when they say they'll show up. For me, that's still almost exotic, stability without the theater and drama. Maybe someday I'll talk to my parents again, maybe if they continue to work on themselves, we can meet without pain, without the old scripts. Maybe Emma and I will have a relationship where I don't have to be responsible and she doesn't have to be the child, or maybe not. And you know what's most surprising? I'm okay with it, because for the first time in my life, I don't wait for them to see me, I see myself, and that's finally enough.